8 or 10 of us, I think, at the dinner. If there was a party, then I'd know nothing about that.
The British monarchy is drifting into yet another storm of explosive drama, and this time it circles around the most controversial ex-royal of them all. Andrew's secret plans have finally leaked, and the second Fergie heard them, she reportedly grabbed her bags and rushed out of Royal Lodge without a single glance back. But what truly unfolded behind those shut doors? And how did Andrew's hidden agenda backfire so spectacularly that it shattered Fergie's carefully rebuilt public image? Join us as we uncover the dramatic story of how one man's refusal to accept accountability brought down not just himself, but the woman who had stood loyally by his side. The peppercorn rent scandal that started it all. Andrew's big fall from being a respected royal started not just because of his friendship with Epstein, but also because people were shocked to learn how little he had been paying to live in a fancy house for so long. In October 2025, a newspaper called The Times asked for information and found out something that made many taxpayers in Britain very angry. Andrew's lease on his £30 million home said he only had to pay 1 peppercorn each year in rent, which really meant he was living there for free. For more than 20 years, Andrew and Sarah Ferguson lived in a huge mansion with 30 rooms, 7 bedrooms, big gardens that were as big as 60 football fields, and beautiful old features that could sell for millions, all without paying anything at all. The revelation came at a particularly sensitive time when millions of British citizens were struggling with rising costs of living and increasing economic hardship. The fact that a disgraced former royal who had stepped back from public duties 6 years earlier was living rent-free in a Crown estate property sparked outrage from politicians and citizens alike. Conservative MP Giuffre Clifton-Brown, who chaired the UK Parliament's Public Accounts Committee, immediately wrote letters to the Treasury and Crown estate demanding detailed explanations about the lease arrangement and how taxpayer money was being spent on Andrew's accommodations. What made the situation even more shocking was that Andrew had technically paid £1 million for the lease back in 2003 and committed to spending £7.5 million on refurbishments. However, because he exceeded the minimum refurbishment requirement, he was effectively treated as having bought out any rental payments.
It's terrible. I mean, you're going away and leaving what you love behind.
Leaving him with no ongoing costs. Royal insiders revealed that King Charles had been trying for years to convince his brother to move to smaller, more appropriate accommodations, like Frogmore Cottage, the 5-bedroom home that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had vacated. But Andrew refused every offer because he was determined to maintain the lifestyle he believed he deserved, despite his fall from public favor. The peppercorn rent scandal was more than just about money. It showed everything that people in Britain didn't like about Andrew. How he felt he deserved special treatment, how he wouldn't take responsibility for his actions, and how he seemed to think that rules didn't apply to him. With the growing pressure and more news stories, Sarah Ferguson became involved in a scandal that was not her fault, but was all about the man she decided to support. But while the rent issue was all over the news, an even bigger problem from Andrew's past was about to come to light. Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir. Just when Andrew thought things were getting better, Virginia Giuffre's book, Nobody's Girl, came out in October 2025 and made everything worse. Giuffre, who sadly took her own life in April 2025 at the age of 41, wrote about her terrible experiences being sold by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and Andrew was a big part of her story. The book included detailed accounts of 3 times she said she met Andrew when she was just 17 and 18 years old, including what she called a party on Epstein's private island with about 8 other girls who were also underage. The book came out at a really bad time for Andrew. He had always said he had never met Giuffre and even hinted in a bad BBC interview in 2019 that the famous picture of them together might not be real.
And this week, more revelations are expected from a book she wrote before taking her own life.
In her book, Giuffre talked about how Andrew tried to make her look bad. She wrote that his team tried to pay people online to bother her and make people doubt her story. She was upset because, even after she settled her lawsuit against him for about £3 million in 2022, Andrew never gave her a real apology. The release of the book put the royal family in a tough spot, making people ask more questions about what they knew and when they knew it. News outlets all over the world reported on Giuffre's claims in great detail, and many people started to turn against Andrew. Royal helpers who thought the scandal would fade away over time had to face the hard truth that it would stick around. The memoir became a lasting record of Andrew's supposed connection to one of the most famous trafficking cases in recent history, and no amount of legal deals or statements from the palace could make people forget about it. Sarah Ferguson found the release of the memoir very upsetting because it brought attention back to the man she had always defended. Friends said she felt shocked by the new attention and had a hard time accepting that her loyalty to Andrew had cost her more than she thought. The woman who used to say they were the happiest divorced couple now had to deal with questions about whether supporting Andrew made her part of the problem. As Giuffre's story was making headlines all over the world, new emails were about to show just how close Andrew was to Epstein. The emails that proved Andrew lied. In mid-November 2025, the U.S. House Oversight Committee released thousands of documents from Jeffrey Epstein's estate, and buried within those pages were emails that directly contradicted Andrew's claims about when he severed ties with the convicted man. Andrew had said many times that he stopped talking to Epstein in 2010 after Epstein was first found guilty. He even talked about this during his bad BBC interview, saying he chose to end their friendship because of Epstein's wrong actions. However, the new emails showed a completely different situation. In February 2011, just one day after British newspapers showed a famous picture of Andrew with his arm around 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre, Andrew sent an email to Epstein saying, "It looks like we are in this together and need to rise above it. Otherwise, let's stay in touch and have some fun soon."
Prince Andrew will be formally stripped of his royal titles. He is no longer a prince.
The email sounded friendly and happy, showing that their friendship was still strong. In another email from March 2011, after finding out that the Mail on Sunday was getting ready to publish stories about them, Andrew wrote to both Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in a panic, asking them to say publicly that he didn't know anything wrong was happening. "I can't handle this anymore," Andrew begged in the emails, asking them to make it clear that he was not involved and didn't know anything about the claims. The emails showed that Epstein had confirmed the picture with Giuffre was real, which went against Andrew's claims that it could be fake. In a July 2011 email, Epstein told someone, "Yes, she was on my plane, and yes, she took a picture with Andrew, just like many of my workers have."
And then on the day that she says that this occurred, they'd already left.
Epstein also hinted that Buckingham Palace would be happy if someone looked into Giuffre and proved she was lying. This showed that Andrew's team was trying to make Giuffre look bad, even though Andrew said he didn't know anything about the accusations. The royal family was in big trouble because of these new findings. Andrew had not only lied about stopping his friendship with Epstein, but he was also working with a convicted offender to handle serious accusations. The emails revealed that Andrew was more focused on managing a scandal than being upset about the bad things his friend did. Commentators pointed out that King Charles, who was already trying to separate the monarchy from his brother's problems, now had proof that Andrew had been very dishonest about how much he was involved. Even though the emails were getting a lot of attention, another surprising thing about Andrew's actions was about to come out. King Charles strips Andrew of his titles in unprecedented move. On October 30th, 2025, Buckingham Palace released a statement that sent shockwaves through Britain and beyond. King Charles had initiated a formal process to remove all of his brother's remaining royal titles and honors, meaning Andrew would no longer be known as His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, Duke of York, but simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Constitutional experts called the move unprecedented in the monarchy's modern history, noting that it represented the first genuine royal crisis of Charles's reign and a watershed moment for how the institution handles scandal. The statement was brief but devastating. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge has to date provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to different private housing. These punishments are seen as important, even though he still says the accusations are not true. The palace also made it clear that the king and queen were thinking about and feeling for the victims and survivors of harsh treatment, reminding everyone that Andrew's denials didn't matter because of the strong evidence against him. Andrew lost his titles, which was more than just taking away his fancy names. It meant he was no longer part of the royal family and what it stood for.
It is the maximization of my time for the best value for money.
He couldn't use the royal standard flag anymore, wouldn't get any money from the royal family, and would have to pay for his own security and living costs from now on. Commentators said that Charles didn't have much choice because of the growing public pressure and the many bad news stories, but it was still a tough moment for a family that valued loyalty and keeping things private. The announcement became even more important because it included an eviction notice from Royal Lodge. Andrew was told he had to give up his lease and move to a house on the Sandringham estate, which is the king's private property in Norfolk. Choosing Sandringham was a smart move, since it is private property and not owned by the crown. No taxpayer money would be used to house the former royal who had fallen from grace. This move would basically send Andrew away from Windsor, cutting him off from royal power and putting him hours away from London and where public life happens. While Andrew faced the loss of everything he had clung to for years, his ex-wife was prepared to face her own reckoning. Sarah Ferguson's troubles. The palace statement that stripped Andrew of his titles made no specific mention of Sarah Ferguson, but the implications were clear. She too would have to leave Royal Lodge. Unlike Andrew, who had a lease on the property, Fergie had been living there only as Andrew's guest since moving back in 2008. She had no legal right to remain and no claim to any royal accommodations. Sources close to Ferguson told reporters that she felt absolutely bereft and completely on edge as the reality of her situation sank in. The woman who had spent more than 2 decades as a fixture at Royal Lodge suddenly faced the prospect of leaving the only home she had known since her comeback to royal life. Friends said Ferguson was devastated by the king's decision, describing her as feeling blindsided, despite the years of mounting scandals and warning signs. She had believed that her loyalty to Andrew would be rewarded, that the royal family would eventually forgive both of them and allow them to fade into comfortable obscurity. Instead, she found herself being cast out alongside the brother of the king, with no guarantee of where she would live or how she would support herself going forward. Royal commentators noted that Fergie had always been something of an outsider in royal circles, never fully accepted after her scandalous divorce and the toe-sucking incident that had humiliated the family in the 90s. Ferguson had worked really hard in the last few years to fix her public image and reputation. She became a popular children's author, gained a lot of followers on social media, and people admired her for fighting breast cancer in 2023. She created a life for herself that didn't depend only on her royal connections, and many people respected her strength and determination. But all that support disappeared when she decided to keep living with and defending Andrew. Even as more evidence against him came out, the woman who was once called the People's Duchess now felt alone, abandoned by the same public that had once welcomed her. Ferguson was told clearly that she could not move to Sandringham with Andrew. The king was okay with giving his brother a place to stay on family land, but he would not do the same for Andrew's ex-wife. Ferguson would have to find and pay for her own home, which meant she was completely leaving the royal life she had known for almost 40 years. People said she felt like her future was uncertain and was worried that at 66 years old, starting fresh would be very hard. But even as Ferguson grappled with her impending eviction, reports began to emerge about where she might go. Reports surfaced about Fergie's possible move to Portugal. In the middle of November 2025, the Daily Mail shared news that Sarah Ferguson might be thinking about moving to Portugal to live with her daughter, Princess Eugenie. Eugenie and her husband, Jack Brooksbank, bought a big house for £3.6 million in a fancy neighborhood where many celebrities and rich people live. Neighbors said that Fergie was expected to arrive in January. The news also mentioned that Eugenie had made a special grand suite in the house just for her mom, giving her a safe place away from the problems and attention she faced in Britain. Thinking about moving to Portugal seemed like a good idea for many reasons. Living in another country would help Ferguson get away from the non-stop media attention and public criticism she dealt with in the UK, where everything she did or said was closely watched and judged. It would also mean she would be far from Andrew, which might help her become more independent and start over in her life. The fancy community in Portugal promised privacy, safety, and a chance to meet new people who wouldn't just see her as a royal or focus on her past problems. But not everyone thought Ferguson would really go through with the move. Experts on the royal family said that even with everything happening, she had never really cut ties with Andrew before, so it seemed unlikely she would do it now. Property expert Robin Edwards told GB News that it wouldn't be surprising if Ferguson kept living with or close to Andrew, especially because they had money issues together and depended on each other for support during tough times. Edwards mentioned that Fergie had called Andrew a kind and good man, even when things were bad for him, and had said that, "My duty is to him," no matter what accusations came up. Other reports talked about different options for where Ferguson might live in the future. Some people said she could move into a small apartment at Princess Beatrice's expensive house in the Cotswolds, which had been recently fixed up and would be a good fit for her. Others thought that she and Andrew might try to get 2 different houses in Windsor, with some insiders saying they asked for both Frogmore Cottage and Adelaide Cottage, if they agreed to leave Royal Lodge without any trouble. These mixed reports showed that there was a lot of uncertainty about Ferguson's future and how she seemed unable to completely separate herself from the royal family or from Andrew. While Ferguson weighed her options, Andrew was digging in his heels and refusing to leave quietly. Andrew refuses to budge. After the king officially told Andrew to leave Royal Lodge, Andrew made it clear he wasn't going anywhere without a fight. People close to him said he was not moving and not talking to anyone, staying inside the mansion like he was under attack. Some insiders even thought Andrew was worried the royal family might cut off his electricity to force him out, which would have made big news everywhere. The situation between the king and his younger brother was called the Siege of Royal Lodge in the media, a phrase that showed how ridiculous and stubborn Andrew was being. Andrew didn't want to leave for many reasons, not just because he liked the place. He had a lease that wouldn't end until 2078, which he thought meant he couldn't be kicked out. His lawyers told him that if the Crown Estate wanted him to leave early, they would have to pay him about €558,000 and give him an extra £185,865 every year until 2028. Andrew seemed to think that if he just refused to leave, he could make the king either give up or pay him a lot of money to leave quietly. Andrew seemed to think that the king wanted him to leave Royal Lodge, not because he was being punished, but because Queen Camilla wanted it as a place to live if she outlived King Charles. Friends of Andrew said that he and his daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, talked a lot about this idea and believed it explained why Charles was so determined to make him leave. Andrew saw himself not as a former royal who deserved to be punished, but as someone being unfairly treated in a family struggle that helped the Queen. This belief made him feel like he was in the right, even though many people were judging him negatively. Andrew's choice to stay in one place had effects that went beyond just making his own situation last longer. By not leaving, he was also stopping Sarah Ferguson from moving on with her life and making her stay caught up in a scandal that was ruining her reputation. Friends said Fergie was getting more and more upset with Andrew's stubbornness and his clear inability to see that what he was doing was hurting everyone around him, not just himself. Even as Andrew continued to resist, evidence surfaced that he hadn't completely retreated from public view. Andrew caught riding horses. In November 2025, photographers saw Andrew riding horses at the Windsor estate several times. This showed that he had not moved out of Royal Lodge, even though the king had told him to leave and made public statements about it. The pictures showed Andrew looking sad while riding with a woman, but many people thought it was rude that he was still using the Windsor grounds. People close to the royal family told the Daily Mail that the king won't be happy that his brother has been seen riding in the grounds of Windsor Castle, which is paid for by taxpayers. The horse riding pictures were especially troubling because they were taken just a few days after U.S. lawmakers publicly criticized Andrew for not answering their request to talk about his long friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Democrats Robert Garcia and Suhas Subramaniam accused Andrew of hiding and said that his silence in response to the lawmakers' request for testimony said a lot. They made it clear that their investigation would continue whether he cooperated or not, and that they would make sure anyone involved in Epstein's crimes would be held responsible, no matter how rich or powerful they were. Andrew's public horseback rides showed that he either didn't understand what was happening or was purposely ignoring it. He was a man who lost his titles, received an eviction notice, and was accused by officials from other countries of blocking justice. Yet he was riding horses on Crown property like nothing was wrong. Royal expert Jenny Bond told reporters that Andrew probably felt humiliated and, by all accounts, angry, but his actions made it seem like he didn't really understand how serious his situation was or how much people disapproved of him. The pictures also showed something uncomfortable. Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had just moved into a house called Adelaide Cottage in Windsor, which is only about a mile away from Royal Lodge. Many people thought it was rude that Andrew was happily riding around Windsor while his nephew and his family were trying to settle into their new home. This showed that he didn't realize how his being there affected other family members. People said that the Wales family would feel relieved when Andrew finally moved to Sandringham and was no longer around them every day. Even though Andrew held on tightly to his life in Windsor, the news about where he would live next would show everyone how much he had lost. The truth about where. Andrew and Fergie. By late November 2025, it was still not clear where Andrew and Sarah Ferguson would end up, showing the confusion and problems surrounding the Royal Lodge situation. Buckingham Palace announced that Andrew would be moving to a house on the Sandringham estate, which is about 3 hours away from Windsor in Norfolk. This large private property, covering 20,000 acres, provided privacy and safety without needing any money from taxpayers, making it a good choice. Some people wondered if Ferguson would really make a big move to distance herself from Andrew. Even with all the scandals and the harm his actions had done to her reputation, she had never really cut ties with him before.
I'm the generational bridge because I'm still very young, in case you hadn't realized. Yeah, exactly.
Royal expert Phil Dampier said that behind closed doors, their relationship might not be as strong as it looked to everyone else, describing them as being in a situation where they can't live with each other, can't live without each other. He thought that being forced to leave Royal Lodge might actually mean the beginning of the end for their strange relationship after their divorce. Neither Andrew nor Ferguson would be leaving Royal Lodge until after Christmas 2025 at the earliest, even though there was a formal eviction notice and a lot of public pressure. Moving out of a big 30-room mansion filled with years of belongings would take time. Because of this, the story would keep making headlines into 2026, making sure that Andrew's scandals and Ferguson's involvement would stay in people's minds for a long time. The important question was not just where they would live, but whether they could ever really move on from the scandal that had taken over their lives. The Royal Lodge scandal brought up bigger questions about fairness, privilege, and what a modern monarchy should be like. Andrew didn't take responsibility for being friends with someone who was convicted of a serious crime. He tried to make his accusers look bad and held on to fancy living arrangements that he didn't deserve anymore. This hurt not only his own reputation, but also the reputation of the British monarchy as a whole. King Charles finally decided to take strong action, but many people thought he should have done it much earlier. He only acted after a lot of public and political pressure made it clear that he couldn't ignore the situation any longer. Do you think Sarah Ferguson should have separated herself from Andrew years ago? Or was her loyalty admirable, even if misguided? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.